5 o'clock, so I'll welcome everybody to this City Planning Committee meeting. We have everybody in attendance, all committee members, Alderman Briscoe, Councillor Harvey, Alderman Barakis, Councillor Dutta and Councillor Coates, so welcome. And I'd just like to advise all present that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the community via the City of Hobart YouTube channel, and due to physical distancing and density limits, we are limited for seating within the chamber, so we may pause between items to allow for members of the community wishing to address the committee to be accommodated within the chamber. I'll remind everybody that to turn their mobile phones to silent or off, thank you. And in recognition of the deep history and culture of this place, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which the City of Hobart was built, the Muanina people. I acknowledge the determination and resilience of the Palawa Pakana people of Tasmania, La Trawitta, who have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, culture and rights. I recognise the values of continuing Aboriginal knowledge and cultural practice and pay my respects to elders past, present and any Tasmanian Aboriginal or First Nations people here today. We have nobody to co-opt or no need. Item 2 is confirmation of minutes from the last meetings. Councillor Dutta, thank you. Those in favour, those against, item is carried. Item 3 is consideration of supplementary items, but we have none. Item 4 is indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Nobody. Item 5, transfer of agenda items. None. Item 6, planning authority items, consideration of items with deputations. Alderman Barakis, thank you. Those in favour, those against, items carried. Item 6, planning authority items. Consideration, did I just do that? Consideration of deputation. Item 7, committee acting as planning authority, and we'll hear the first one, which is 7.1.1, 251 Macquarie Street, Hobart, 3 multiple dwellings, and the first representative is Iris Ivanaki. Oh, so hasn't come in yet, so we'll go to the second representative. Mr. Adam Wallace, are you here? Would you like to come up to the table, please? Thank you. If you want to turn your phone off, that'll be good. And Mr. Wallace, you have 5 minutes to present to the committee, and then we'll ask questions if we have any. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for letting me voice a few objections to this proposal, and it's mostly to do with the height and the mass of the building. Next to it is a small cottage of extreme heritage, been there for nearly 200 years. Now the height of this proposal will block out light, space, and certain windows look straight down into the living area of the cottage. So we're going to reduce the privacy and lifestyle of the people in that cottage. I'd also ask that the council, in making a decision, reflect on the heritage precinct as a whole and the mass of this particular building within that precinct. One of the important parts of the precinct is the Hobart rivulet and the amount of people using that at the moment, and I guess the way that it is used, the parklands, the walkways, the rivulet itself, the unrealised potential of that space, and to reflect on just looking back towards the building and up to the other old buildings within that area. The small cottage, of which I obviously have most concern about, I feel this new building will overshadow it, oversized, it loses views from the mountain, and so limits the people who occupy it, limits their lifestyle. It shuts down basically the rivulet vistas. The couple of other concerns are to do with ongoing civil matters that, if this proposal is granted, may cause anguish and anxiety in the future. It has a cantilevered second floor that has a height of 2.1, I believe, and so limits it. So the cantilever goes over a right-of-way that is shared by both properties. This will discriminate on the type of vehicles being allowed to use by the other, both properties really, and may cause concern in the future for movement, types of vehicles, what you can put on them, it'll just be awkward. And then again, the objections for privacy, just some of the windows, even though they have shrouds, I think their sizes will encroach on the privacy of the people in the cottage. So given a few of these, I know that building ticks all the planning boxes, but I just hope that you reflect on the size of the building in relation to the area and the buildings around it. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And just for clarification, that overshadowing. Oh, if you can remain seated, because the microphone picks up any of your answers to anybody listening at home. The overshadowing that you're talking about, which particular, is that the cottage, did you say, that would be overshadowed, or?
So the heritage cottage, which is actually nearly 200 years.
On what side?
Well, if you're in the rivulet looking up towards the precinct, it's on the left side. There are two old cottages that are original to the area.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Right, I'll open it to further questions. Alderman Briscoe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Further to the overshadowing, this is, how would it be overshadowed? You're talking about the weatherboard buildings in front of the brick building of 245?
Yeah, that's it.
How would that be overshadowed? Because the sun's coming from the other direction.
Yeah, I guess in terms of overshadowing, I'm talking about the sheer size of the building itself.
Bulk.
Yeah. So, because it's also being built over car parking spaces, so to get the maximum use of the space, the developers are building over the car parking spaces, which is basically running up the driveway towards the cottage itself. And the sheer size and height of it basically blocks out the mountain and all views and vistas of the rivulet towards the mountain. It narrows the outlook of the cottage.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? No further questions. If you'd like to take your seat again, thank you very much. And I believe we have Ms. Iwanicki. Sorry, I probably haven't said your name properly, but would you like to just put your camera on and...
Yes.
Hello. Sorry,
Hello.
How do you say your last name?
It's pronounced Iwanitsky, but I don't really insist on that because my maiden name was Reed years ago and I always struggled with it.
Okay, all right, thank you. So you have 5 minutes to make your points to committee. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. I sent a representation in because I had a look at the plans and the massing of this building is of some concern. It actually goes right down towards the very edge of the what was the former mill race, and I'm a little bit dubious about the height of the building because it states in the report it would be no higher than 10 metres, but there's quite a fall across that land. So are we taking the height from the actual level of the site, or are we taking the height from the height of the the foundations. I just need, so I suppose I'm a little bit confused about that, but really overall I think it'd be a pity if this were built as proposed. I'm not saying that it's not possible to have another flat or whatever, but my response has been, after looking at the Heritage Precinct H4, described in Table 13.2 as being, and it talks about the settings being significant for the quality and quantity of intact colonial residential buildings that exemplify the historical development phases of the precinct. There's, you know, it acknowledges that there's a large number of early colonial buildings that survive, which provide evidence of the development of early Hobart. And it goes on to say the scale and style of buildings in Macquarie Street has a high degree of coherence and continuity and has remained relatively free of intrusions. As a visitor to Hobart, I had the delightful discovery of finding the Rivulet Walk, and the view from that walk provides a lovely view of the actual rivulet and the birds, etc. But it also gives one an opportunity to look at the back of buildings, which is unusual. So you virtually have a great attraction that I'd say is a secret for discovery by visitors to Hobart. And I looked at the Rivulet Heritage Precinct, HR1, which stated that it is significant for reasons including the numerous remaining buildings, complexes, intact infrastructure and archaeological features which demonstrate the importance of the rivulet in the development of early Hobart industrial activity and settlement. The contribution by the rivulet to the aesthetic and visual qualities of the precinct and wider Hobart area through its diverse setting and structures along its length. Now, if I could just pause on that just for a moment, it is the views of the gardens and the rear areas which don't come down as far as this proposed development. And it actually provides a sort of a journey of discovery. And I really think that it detracts from the adjoining properties because they are also heritage listed. And I think it would be a pity if we're allowed to proceed in this manner. And the provisions of E1372, Heritage Place, buildings and works other than demolition, needs to take into account the relationship of the precinct, including its proximity to the Rivulet Heritage Precinct in a more contextual sense. Given that each application is considered on the individual circumstance of location, I believe that in this instance, concern for townscape qualities is highly relevant. The objective that development at a heritage place within the precinct should be undertaken in a sympathetic manner which does not cause loss of historical cultural heritage significance and designed to be subservient to the historical cultural heritage values of the place and responsive to its dominant characteristics. I think the issue is to ensure the retention of townscape qualities along that particular walkway, and also I'm concerned because we are being confronted on an almost daily basis of the increased risks of extreme weather events, and I believe that it would be much more respectful of the heritage and of the Rivulet Walk if the development was not extending so far down towards the creek line.
Now, would you, your time is almost up, so would you like to summarise now, please, and we can ask questions of you.
All right, thank you. I think in terms of massing, height and location, it detracts from the Rivulet Walk experience and also detracts from the adjoining heritage buildings. I also note that the allotment size is somewhat marginal when you look at the desired areas for additional residences. So I think it's an overdevelopment of the site, and I think on that basis it should be rejected and the applicant encouraged to reconsider the proposal.
Thank you very much. Now I open it to the committee for questions. We'll start with you, Alderman Bracken.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, just one question. Just wondering if have you read the planning officer's report, and if so, do you have any response to the recommendations of the officers and what they've said in regards to heritage?
I assume that they have recommended approval, but I haven't had a chance to read it very closely. I'm just pointing out the aspects that I think should be considered very seriously.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, look, thanks for your deputation. I'd like to follow up on this idea that you look at it from the rivulet. The rivulet walk doesn't go past it. You walk through a car park which is probably 70 metres or so away from the rivulet. So, and I agree with what you're saying, but I just don't see the connection between walking along the rivulet track and looking at the back of that house. I look at it because I love the house that our the previous person spoke about, and I saw that be restored after it was being left, with holes in the roof for a long time. But anyway, I agree with what you're saying, but I don't see the connection with looking at it as you're walking along the rivulet track, because the rivulet track is a fair distance at that section from the rivulet. So,
I suppose because I have a background in heritage planning, I always look at areas not just straight in front of me or straight across a car park. And I think also the relationship of the mill and the remains of the mill building and bridge as you enter the car park, my curiosity is always aroused, and I think most people are. And I think as I walked along the actual walk, I realised that there was a consistency of quite sensitive gardening and landscaping at the back of the buildings, which would be completely lost. The opportunity for providing any sort of natural setting on the subject land would be completely lost, because the actual deck comes down and virtually goes across a section of what I would say would be flood-prone area. So it's going to be totally covered with the addition of the car park. And also the turning circle of the vehicle is not going to really allow any real landscaping along the driveway. If you have a look at the turning circle and the actual width of the driveway, there isn't a great opportunity to beautify that area at all. It's quite squeezy, and I think it would be a pity if it went ahead. And I must say that I've not really had the opportunity in any other city to enjoy a walkway which is quite delightful. There's lots of interesting memorials along there. The vegetation's lovely. You can see the paddy melons scuttling around in the undergrowth, and then you look across the rivulet and you see the backs of these heritage places and the landscaping, and then suddenly this one tends to go right down to the very edge, and I think it's inappropriate.
okay, all right, yep.
Any further questions? I just have a question in relation to the mill, the mill. What's it called? The mill race. I've got.
Yeah.
So, are you concerned about that and any sort of archaeology relating to that?
Well, the fact that it's actually on the side, on the subject land side, obviously that would be a very interesting opportunity for archaeology at some stage, because the mill race, I understand it would have been filled in, but it may have structural aspects, material fabric, as well as perhaps debris that was left when it was filled in. So it's certainly a potential archaeological site. And I think the other point I should add is that the contour lines in terms of the drop down across the site to where the mill race was would suggest that there must be a higher level than the 10 metres. It's a little bit hard. I do have a diagram that I have been looking at, and the details are quite good. But I think it's within the context of the history of how the early settlers really accessed any source of water to survive in, and it's you know, to be a pity to lose that subliminal potential later to investigate perhaps the rivulet mill race section.
Okay, thank you. And if there are no further questions, I'll just, before you, I think you had a question in relation to the height, so I'll ask that of the director. Can we get some idea of what the overall height is, or where it's taken from, Director?
Yeah, so it's taken from natural ground level, where the foundations project out of the natural ground level to directly above that point. So
when you say natural ground level, you have a slope and you have a contour. Is the building going to step down as it goes down the hill?
Well, the foundations step down. If I'm being quizzed.
Yes, yeah. No, I think it'd be helpful for us to.
Yeah, the foundations step down like any building would do in a sloping site. So there's been further information supplied by the applicant on page, for the benefit of the elected members, if I can, it's page 58 of the agenda.
So is there a finished floor level that's available?
Just bear with me. Got that detail. Yeah,
Yes.
again, through you, Chair.
Bracken.
There are finished floor levels, relative floor levels provided on the plans.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, we've had all the questions, so thank you very much for your deputation. We're not hearing from the applicant, so I'll open the item for discussion. Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. There's been a lot of talk about the heritage of this space, and I thought I'd just read out a couple of lines out of the Heritage Officer's report. It does say, in regards to representations raising concerns that inserting a new structure into a heritage place will unreasonably diminish the heritage significance of the place because of the interruption into the rear open space down the rivulet, it must be considered that 1908 drainage plans of the site show residential development behind 251 Macquarie Street. Goes on to say that the archaeology report provided that by the applicant stated these dwellings were likely demolished around 1950. Historically, the site has been utilised for multiple dwellings, and it is only a recent mid to late 20th century history that has seen the rear of 251 Macquarie Street as vacant land. It then goes on to say the siting of the proposed residence is considered removed enough to a degree where the building comfortably reads as a separate structure. So, Chair, given especially that we're talking about the addition of another residential dwelling that, in my view, is sensitive to the heritage characteristics of the area. I appreciate that there are some concerns by members of the public, but I think this is something that's compliant. I think it is providing a needed good for the city, so I'm more than happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Barakis. Further discussion? Just have a couple of questions. So, just in relation to the issue raised by Mr. Wallace about the cantilevering over the driveway and that clearance, is that conditioned as much as it can be, Director?
Well, I think we're reasonably satisfied on the plans that have been submitted that there is sufficient clearance, and some detail went into within the officer's report that shows a clearance of 2.3 metres or thereabouts, and I'll refer you to, if I may, get to the relevant section. No, it's actually within the officer report that's dealt with it. Just bear with me. Easy to find. Yeah, and I refer you to page 12 of the report. And I read from the report for your benefit. With regard to headroom required for four-wheel drive vehicles manoeuvring within the shared right-of-way beneath the cantilevered overhang, the Australian standard section 55.3 headroom states to permit access for both cars and light vans, the height between the floor and the overhead obstruction shall be a minimum of 2.2 metres. I'll then go on. The applicant has provided a diagram that identifies the critical headroom of 2.2 metres at a grade change for vehicles exiting the undercovered car parking space, with the headroom within the car parking space being 2.35 metres. Therefore, meeting the Australian standards for headroom for most vans and for four-wheel drive vehicles that are commonly used.
Okay, thank you.
So I think
that's covered. Yep. And just in relation to the archaeology, that's HER 6 on page 68. It seems to cover off anything that might be found there.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. I'm certainly. I can understand the concerns about what's viewed from the rivulet, but in some ways it's also a renewed sort of pattern of development, and to my mind there is significant heritage examples at the back of that already, or that will still be visible from the rivulet. So it's an interesting sort of ongoing pattern of development as opposed to just a heritage scape. Any further questions or comments? Alderman Briscoe.
Yeah, look, I think it is important, the archaeology in this area, especially the mill race, which powered the plough mill in Barrack Street, I think. Barrack Street. I wonder, the archaeological HER 6 doesn't go far enough in the sense of a copy of the archaeologist's advice and assessment recommendations obtained in accordance with the sections excavation disturbance will not recommence until approval is granted from the council. I wonder if we could just strengthen that up, that we have photographs, because presumably if they do uncover the mill race, that's significant. It's probably once in a lifetime opportunity to see that mill race in present day. So I wonder if we could strengthen that up. Perhaps Mr. Noy might be able to help me here, because I think we should have very good photographic evidence, photographs of the mill race if it's uncovered.
Yeah, and I'm sure that that's the intent of that condition.
So I wonder if we could just add the word something like that, and photographs of the site of any exposed archaeology be provided to council.
This doesn't go to council.
Oh, to council as in council office.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see.
To the satisfaction.
Yeah, to the satisfaction. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Alderman
Condition
Bracken.
4 could be expanded. All features and/or deposits discovered and excavated must be photographically recorded and reported to council within 1 day and prior to the conclusion of excavation.
Yeah. So the key thing to me is photographic evidence. So I wonder if that could be tightened up and added.
Are you happy to accept that in?
That seems reasonable, Chair. I'm more than happy to accept that in.
Thank you, Marcus, as you are always reasonable.
Look, just to say, Chair, that normally we're guided by the Heritage Officer's report, and that recommends approval here, and I don't see any grounds that I could vote against this. I appreciate the concerns of the people giving representations, and the neighbours. They're two 45. I appreciate the work that they've done on their property over the last few years, but I'll be supporting the proposal here tonight. There are no grounds that I can see to refuse it.
Thank you. Further discussion? If not, I'll put the motion slightly modified. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Motion's carried unanimously. We go now to 7.1.2, which is 100 Pinnacle Road, Mount Wellington. And do we have Mr Westmore online? Yes, thank you. So we have our first deputation from Mr David Westmore. So Mr Westmore, welcome. You have full committee here, and you have 5 minutes to address the committee with your concerns. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chairperson. Helen, everyone, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Evening all. Thank you for giving me your time. So the two issues that I raised in my representation were about parking and the issues in Curtis Avenue, and also the risk of non-compliance with the downhill or with the two-way section of Rocky Wheel and Track. Really the main concern I have is about the parking issues. There's two main access points for these new mountain bike tracks. As you probably know, there's already a new skills track up at the top of Bracken Lane Fire Trail near the junction with Grady's Falls track. That's proved very popular. And so it's a great thing for the riders. So we get lots of mountain bike riders coming up Curtis Avenue to enter Bracken Lane Fire Trail from Curtis Avenue, and that's fine. The issue that we have is that also a lot of people come here with their cars, and there's extremely limited parking here in Curtis Avenue. It used to be a dirt road until about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and it's very narrow. There's no, and even though it's a cul-de-sac in a sense, even though it becomes, of course, the fire trail, but there's no place for vehicles to park that's not on the street, and the street being so narrow is extremely limited parking. So my concern is that already we have problems with people parking their cars here, sometimes up the end of the street where council has put no standing zones so that emergency vehicles can access the fire trail easily, and people sometimes park there despite there being no standing. So that's already happening with the existing skills track. So my concern with these two new proposed tracks is that we're going to have even more parking issues here. It's going to make it very difficult for residents to be able to park their cars and for visitors, and it's going to become a real problem. So, and part of the reason for that is that Curtis Avenue is the closest access point for these tracks, or the closer one compared to Pillinger Drive. If you want to park up at Pillinger Drive, there's much more parking area there to go onto Bracken Lane Fire Trail, but it's another 10-15 minutes drive, so people will tend to want to come here. So I don't know there was nothing I could see in the proposal to address those issues, but I would want to see, if this did get approved, council make some significant effort to encourage people not to park and ride from Curtis Avenue, but to do it up to Pillinger Drive where there's more room. The other point that I raised in my representation was about the issue of potential non-compliance by riders with the uphill only direction for riders in the shared use track. Having had a look at it again, since for riders Rocky Wheeling's one is uphill only, and then freewheeling is for downhill only for mountain bike riders, hopefully that won't be an issue. But I have had some encounters over the last 12 years with a few, not only a few, because most mountain bike riders are good, but some do come down downhill tracks that shouldn't be coming down. So that's it. That's all I need to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'll throw it open for questions to the committee. Any questions? Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, David.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi. Can you see, I just had a quick look at Google Earth to see whether there's any area that council could develop as a car park for these mountain bike riders. Do you know of any area that could be developed in the future?
Unfortunately, not in Curtis Avenue, just because of the nature of it's always been, and still is, a very narrow road. Essentially, if you want to drive up and down the road, you have to pull over to allow another vehicle to go past. You can't, you really can't, except at the very close to the intersection with Thinkerpost Track, where Thinkerpost Track is actually a road. That's the only area where it's sort of broad enough for two vehicles. But then it becomes a single vehicle, soon after that. So that's the problem. There's no space that's currently not utilised that could be put aside. Unless council went up right where the trail entrance is, it's pretty steep going down to one side. It's possible there could be space put for a couple of cars there if they did some earthworks and so on, but that would have to be, the issue is whether there would be enough room to allow emergency vehicles through and council maintenance as well. So I think it's unlikely is basically my answer.
Thanks, David.
Any further questions? Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, David, so just on your
Hey, Bill.
street, g'day, is there a lot of bike traffic as well going up and down your street?
Yep, yeah, there is. There's actually a lot of mountain bike traffic going up the street. I didn't really mention that in the representation because I don't have an issue with that. I mean, I'm happy, I'm glad to see more people using the park. As I say, 95% of the bike users I come across, because I walk in the park every day, have been doing so for 12 years, and they're friendly and considerate. Right? So don't have an issue there. It's those who want to park here and then ride that's what's causing the problem in terms of the traffic in the street.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And my question is, the parking, does the congested parking along Curtis Lane,
Curtis Avenue, yeah.
Curtis Avenue, does that cause, is there any sort of problems with access to either your property or, importantly, to the fire trail?
I haven't seen any incidents of blocking access to residents' properties, but certainly I've seen incidents of people parking right up there at the entrance to the Bracken, at the end of Curtis Avenue at the entrance to the fire trail, and people have parked there, and sometimes in a way that would, I suspect, make it difficult for a fire truck to get through there.
Okay, all right, that's not good. All right, thanks very much. If there are no further questions, thank you very much. I'll now ask Mr. Nick Sawyer to come to the table. And Mr. Sawyer is from the Tasmanian National Parks Association. Thank you. If you'd like to take a seat. All right, okay. Thank you. All right.
Thanks for the opportunity to present to you. Yes, I'm President of the National Parks Association, which advocates for good management of our national parks and other reserves. Personally, I've been a walker on Kanani for some 40 or so years. I also ride a bicycle, but I wouldn't call myself a mountain biker. Professionally, I'm retired, but I was a planner with Parks and Wildlife for a number of years, so I've got a bit of a professional background in recreation planning in natural areas as well. How do I?
Should just be able to press it, I think.
One in the middle. Do I need to point it at something?
It will. Bounces.
No, he was joking. Right, you
Are you able to advance it from down there? That's it. That's just a correction. It doesn't alter the gist of it, but I just wanted to set the record straight. Thanks. Next slide. And I'd also make it clear that a few things have changed. I no longer support absolutely everything that was in the initial TNPA submission. Next slide, please. I'll just touch briefly on environmental concerns. That's the Hobart Council's guide for management of its bushland areas. It notes that the key threat is to biodiversity is habitat fragmentation. Next slide, please. 37 kilometres of new tracks that are proposed in Riding the Mountain seems to me to be quite a lot of habitat fragmentation. I'm aware that Council's has addressed some of the issues in the DA, but I note that Council Planning is still recommending conditions related to this, particular S2 about weed infestation that is facilitated by the tracks, and has also expressed some concern about cumulative impacts. And I'd have to say that we still have some concerns that hasn't been considered well enough, and that BirdLife Tasmania shares those concerns. Next one, please. The DA is the proposal for the construction of some of the tracks proposed in Riding the Mountain. Very brief history of mountain biking. It's been increasing in popularity over the last 30 years or so. Initially, there were a lot of problems with mountain bikes on all the walking tracks. A lot of these have now been resolved by various methods. Next slide, please. The approach, though, has still been somewhat ad hoc, and there's still some outstanding problem areas. Riding the Mountain, that Council put a lot of effort into over the last few years, to my mind, could and should have been the opportunity to identify and address these issues and provide better facilities for mountain bikers. But it would have needed a better understanding of where the problem areas are. Moving on, please. The study was undertaken looking at user conflict as one of the studies leading up to Riding the Mountain. My concern is that it made quite inadequate attempts to engage with walkers as distinct from cyclists. There was no consideration that the wider tracks might be where the problems were occurring, and there was no question of asking people where historically incidents have happened, so it was a huge missed opportunity. Next slide, please. So hence the shared use report essentially missed what seems to be the main problem, which is walkers being scared out of their wits by speeding mountain bikers approaching them from behind, and this mostly happens on the fire trails that are being used to access the bike tracks rather than the bike tracks themselves. We've raised these concerns a number of times, which has led to several meetings with both Council and Wellington Park staff. Next slide, please. I have been taken sufficiently seriously that Council and Wellington Park have installed some experimental signs on Bracken Lane Fire Trail just in the last few weeks, urging everybody to keep left as an attempt to get a little bit of discipline happening on those tracks. The two of you who were able to participate in the site visit yesterday would have seen that and seen some examples of interactions between riders and pedestrians and heard from some of the concerned locals. I have to say that I'm both surprised and disappointed that Council has pressed on with the development of these tracks prior to resolving more definitely some of these problems. And last slide, please. Sorry, I can hardly read this from here. If I can move a wee bit closer. Sorry, you're probably losing the recording. But I'm really concerned that this will exacerbate the existing problems by concentrating additional riders into the area of Bracken Lane that has already got acknowledged user conflict problems, seeing as two of the new tracks start from the area just a within a couple of 100 metres of the sign in the previous photograph. So what I'm suggesting is that council puts the implementation of riding the mountain on hold, does a bit further consultation to revise the proposal, because I really think that there's scope for a really good outcome here that would provide better outcomes all round. And down the bottom, I suggest a few practical solutions that could lead to that. Separating use as far as possible, locating the tracks so that they can be accessed with minimum interaction with walkers, and that would also address the previous representative's concern perhaps about concentrating parking in particular areas. But I'm not ignoring that there will be inevitably bottlenecks like Bracken Lane Fire Trail where other approaches will be needed. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you'd like to take your seat at the table still so we can ask some questions, because I'm sure there will be questions. We'll start with you, Alderman Briscoe, then Alderman Baracus.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Sorry I couldn't make it yesterday at short notice. This application is for three new tracks, and you're asking us to, stop the whole program, which is, as you've pointed out in your representation, 30 odd kilometres of new tracks. Wouldn't you think that we can't do that because the council has already decided that the master plan for the... So wouldn't it be better, have you got any individual concerns about these particular tracks, apart from the general ones you have about all of it?
Well, one of the two tracks going off from the end of Bracken Lane wasn't actually in the original Riding the Mountain, so there was no opportunity for public feedback on it. It seemed the original proposal was simply for a track going from Bracken Lane up to Shoebridge Bend to allow riders to access the start of the north-south track at that point, which seemed to have at least some justification. The new proposal is to have both an up and a down track at that location, which seems to be aimed at partly at least at providing a sort of downhill training area for novice mountain bikers. And to my mind, that doubling of the tracks and that additional use is, or the additional training purpose is likely to attract an awful lot more riders to that location. And I think we've established that Bracken Lane Fire Trail is one of the main bottlenecks, if not the main one. And I would strongly urge council to look at developing those sort of opportunities somewhere a bit further away, which might also avoid parking issues on Curtis Avenue or Pillinger Drive, and also avoid the main access to it being along Bracken Lane.
Thank you.
Alderman Baracus.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you to Mr. Sawyer. I've got a couple of questions. Just to start off, at the beginning of your presentation, I missed the exact wording. You said that your association initially fully agreed with the recommendations, and now you no longer fully agree with the recommendations?
We never fully agreed with them by any means. We submitted a pretty detailed analysis of which tracks we did or didn't agree with. I have changed my mind on a few of those, particularly the one I was just discussing, which has appeared since the original Riding the Mountain document was put out for public comment.
Okay, thank you. And just in regards to the comments about the consultation process, and I suppose noting that it's partly a planning thing, but also part of it is not. But it's not the first time similar concerns have been raised with me on other issues in regards to consultation. What are you suggesting that there was consultation with certain interested parties or groups, but not with others, or there was more consultation for some and less for, like, what was What was your experience with the consultation process from as far as your association is concerned?
Well, there were several stages of consultation in this, which started off with a survey of mountain bikers, and then the crucial one was the shared use survey. And to my mind, the key thing in that should have been the people who are sharing the tracks with the mountain bikers, which is primarily the walkers. But there seems to have been remarkably little attempt to actually reach out and contact walkers. The survey seems to have been based largely on a pre-existing contact list of mountain bikers, and also it was perfectly reasonably asking for feedback from people either as a walker, a trail runner or a mountain biker, and if you were more than one of those, it was encouraging you to, make a separate representation or separate input as each, with the result that I'm pretty sure that, highly likely that a lot of the representations from walkers came from walkers who are also mountain bikers, which means that they're far more likely to be tolerant of mountain bikers than some of the walkers who don't mountain bike, such as the people that Helen and Bill heard from yesterday, who are, have still got some serious concerns about it. So I feel that it could have been a much better survey than it was, and it would probably have brought a lot of these issues to light much earlier if it had been more broadly targeted and not with this mindset that we only need to consult mountain bikers and the problems all seem to occur only on the mountain bike, single track mountain bike tracks. I think that might have blinded them to a lot of the major concerns.
I suppose I'm not trying to put words in your mouth at all, but are you just to boil that down, are you suggesting that the consultation process was a bit narrow in scope and limited to just certain aspects of it where you think it should have been more open as to the full range of issues?
That's pretty much it, yes.
Thank you.
We'll give Mr Fisher a right of reply when he acts as the proponent. I'll hear from Councillor Dutta first, please, and then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. The issue of consultation that I was going to bring up has already been asked, and so I'll leave that. I'll have a question later of the Director.
You don't want to ask? Oh, okay. Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So, Nick, going back to revisit the Ride the Mountain thing is not the issue tonight. This is the planning committee. So, I know, yeah, your questions were interesting and important, but irrelevant to the issues tonight. So I think we've got to focus on tonight's planning application. With regard to the three trails, so two of them are shared trails with bikes riding up. We looked at the start of one of those trails off Bracken Lane, the Bracken Lane Fire Trail yesterday. So do you feel that having bikes ride uphill and not so that they haven't got access to ride down the hill, is that a good? Are you happy with that?
Sorry,
so they're shared trails, walking up and down, running up and down, but mountain bikers can only ride up.
That situation is not, as I see it, particularly problematic, no. And if I could correct you, the start of the track that we were looking at yesterday is actually the start of two of the tracks. They start and finish at the same point, but are separate for most of the length.
I'm struggling to find that in these maps that we have in our agenda.
Do you want to have a look at these, Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, the big ones, yeah.
Might help you.
But
so those are essentially covering those two areas. So I think it's I think you're talking at the O'Grady's full.
But there needs to be a really big bold line that says here's the bloody track here, so we actually can follow it on the, because I'm struggling to, is it the pink line and the orange line?
So there are two tracks there, as far as my understanding is that if you're looking from O'Grady's Fire Trail, you have
what colour is
orange,
the track?
Well, it's got a the Rocky Whelan track and the freewheeling track.
Okay, yellow and pink.
Yes.
Yep, okay. So they both start at the same point. And these are both two trails that you can't ride down, you can only ride up.
Maybe Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Fisher, can you just explain to, the 4 trails I think that we're looking at?
Yeah, you're right. Through you, Chair, there are quite truthfully there are 4 trails. One is is an existing trail that's being upgraded. It's an informal track, which is the Upper Luge we spoke about.
And where's that?
Which is a downhill only track.
It's on the second page.
On the second page.
Yep.
The Rocky Whelan track and as Mr. Sawyer indicates, one of the tracks, Rocky Whelan and Freewheeling, are about separating that conflict area between walkers and mountain bike riders, so that mountain bike riders can only ride a mountain bike on a shared path. Walkers and mountain bike riders can only go uphill, and the nature of the beast indicates that the huffing and puffing of those people might indicate that they're coming up behind you. They might be coming very quickly, and then on the downhill section, that track, the proposed new track, is for mountain bike riders only. And that's specifically to avoid and to address the issues raised by the TNPA about conflict between fast-moving mountain bikes and walkers using those tracks.
All right, so is that clarified for you?
No, yeah, I need to hear it several times to lock it in. So the downhill track is which one? The
2 downhill tracks.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Do you want me to
what are
show
they?
you?
Freewheeling is the downhill track, and Rocky Whelan is the shared use track with mountain bikes only going uphill.
Okay. All right, because I couldn't read it at all on because we don't get very clear diagrams. All right, so now that I'm getting clearer of what these tracks are, so you're okay, Nick, with the riding up. And so what are the other issues that you want to tell us about again?
My concern, as I've said, it's the impression I've got is that the main user conflict issues are actually on the wider tracks, the fire trails. It might seem quite counterintuitive, but on the single tracks, if a cyclist encounters a walker or another cyclist or whatever, there's no room to swerve round them. You've just got to deal with it. Vast majority of people do in a perfectly civilised way.
Mm-hmm.
The problem seems to be on the wider tracks, particularly the fire trails, where cyclists think they've got room to swerve around a walker, approaching a walker from behind. That can be a pretty terrifying experience if you've got absolutely no idea that a cyclist is approaching you from behind, and suddenly you are almost getting knocked over by one going past you. I can vouch for that from personal experience from an incident when I nearly got cleaned up almost 6 years ago. I'm not a nervous person normally, but I still get twitchy walking down that section of Radford's track whenever I hear anything behind me.
So it's not the tracks, there's not these new tracks specifically, it's the interaction on the wider tracks.
That's my main concern, yes, that the positioning of the start and finish point of these 2 new tracks linking Bracken Lane and Shoebridge Bend there's been no consideration of how riders are going to get to there. Are they going to be coming along Bracken Lane from Ferntree? Are they going to be coming up from Curtis Avenue? Or are they going to be riding up the tracks from Strickland Avenue?
Okay, because I think Chair, I think what you're talking about is a broader issue of conflict on the tracks on the wider fire trails.
Primarily, yes.
With the entry points to these other trails as well. So, but looking at that, what you're talking about from the planning perspective tonight is, I think, a broader issue than what we're doing here tonight, which is looking at the approval of these new tracks.
I'm very conscious of that.
Yeah.
Mr.
All right,
Sawyer,
thank you.
Just in relation to the junction with O'Grady's Falls fire trail, you might remember, I don't know if you've got it in front of you, but you might remember that the Rocky Whelan and Free Whelan trails actually join before it comes onto O'Grady's Falls Fire Trail. And when we had a look, and thanks for your time yesterday, when we had a look yesterday, it looked like it was relatively steep coming down off there. Do you think that that sort of conflict, there would be a conflict with walkers, and what sort of walkers use O'Grady's Falls Fire Trail?
In terms of what sort of walkers, absolutely everybody, I would say. There's a lot of elderly fern tree residents, such as you met yesterday, families with kids possibly on almost toy bikes. In relation to the track coming down there, there have certainly been incidents in the past on, you remember there's two other intersections further back towards Fern Tree of tracks coming down.
Yes.
Neither of them are now legal for bikes, but before, when they were legal, there were certainly issues with bikes coming full bore down those as downhill tracks and hurtling out onto the fire trail without slowing down, and that still occurs occasionally, I believe, with illegal use of those tracks. And I'm sure that it's likely to be a problem with the new proposed tracks as well. And I'd suggest that one obvious solution is to put some sort of physical barrier across the bottom of all of those tracks so that riders have to basically slow to a dead stop or dismount in order to get around them, similar to what you've got on the start of the pipeline track where it goes off from the other side of the Fern Tree playground there.
Thank you. And did you have any specifics? I know that we were concentrating on looking at Bracken Lane and the O'Grady's Falls junction, but did you have any particular issues with track 12 and track 17, Skid Road, and the downhill Upper Luge?
The Upper Luge is an existing illegal track. Much as I dislike legitimising tracks that were illegally constructed in the first place, it seems to me that that's the best thing you could possibly do with it is construct it to a decent standard. I have reservations about the uphill climbing track to enable people to get up to the top of it, for the same reason that I've raised about, same concern I've raised about all these tracks, that it's an additional track, it's fragmentation of habitat. Is it really necessary?
So how is it fragmentation? What do you mean? Like, is it, because, I mean, I think that it's quite clear that every, like this proposal is really looking at reducing impact as such. So just could you just elaborate on what you mean, please?
Well, prior to the construction of these tracks, you've got a reasonable expanse of uninterrupted forest. The environmental assessment seems to have focused particularly on the endangered plant species there and avoiding any major trees, but there's been very little focus on the birds or animals in there. The comment I seem to remember seeing was fairly dismissive of there being any impacts on them. The planning officer's report raised some concerns about need for looking at nesting or denning habitats, and also for more precautions to ensure that weed infestation doesn't occur, because mountain bikes are a pretty good way of transporting weeds or diseases such as Phytophthora. And discussing this with Eric Verler of Birds Tasmania, who's a far more knowledgeable ecologist than I am, has raised concerns about the effects of opening the canopy, potentially putting off birds that feed on the forest floor who don't like having broad daylight above their heads, possibly because it exposes them to predators such as goshawks. I might have got the species wrong, but there are other potential concerns about the effects on the ecology of an area that is already pretty heavily crisscrossed with fire trails and so on and existing tracks.
There is a condition, ENV S2, which looks at an audit 10 to 14 months after completion of each track. A weed audit must be carried out along the track alignment. There's a condition there. Whether that satisfies your concerns. Okay, so if there are no further questions, we do have another deputation to hear. So thanks, Mr. Sawyer. If you'd like to take your seat again, thanks for all those points. And I'll call upon Ms. Jane Wilson to come to the table. Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Madam Chairman and Councillors, thanks for having me here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm Jane Wilson. I'm a Commonwealth public servant, former research scientist and librarian. I've walked very regularly on Kanani for the past 7 years, very familiar with the eastern face. I walk in all weathers, particularly love the snowy weather, when the wind blows the snowflakes hither and thither. I've been working on Kanani management issues since 2017, and I've handed around a document, but I'm not going to speak to that document in this meeting. That's a good starting point for background for people who want to know about what needs to be considered when considering recreational planning for Kanani. It's something that TNPA showed to the Council in 2017. So I'm speaking independently. I was formerly part of the TNPA committee, and I still support the TNPA, and everything Nick said tonight I support. Sadly, the TNPA has no media machine, so people don't know that there are other issues that need addressing on Kanani apart from the cable car. So these issues haven't got much publicity. One of them is the issue of parking and overcrowding. That's the idea of the Hall Saddle proposal put forward by Council, and I think developed by Mr. Fisher and Mr. Doyle, is a really good one, and I hope that'll be revived because that's essential. In February 2017, pre-COVID, my good friend Tony Olive and I noticed how overwhelmed with people the Springs became only 2 weeks after the Lost Freight Cafe opened. That's when my work began, and the first issue was overcrowding. Now that more locals are visiting Kanani, that issue is going to rear its head again, so I hope the Hall Saddle proposal will be revisited. But back to the ranch. I just want to thank one more. I want to thank the person, Peter McGlone, from the Tasmanian Conservation Trust, for his support. Without a piece of crucial advice from Peter, Nick and I likely would not be here today. That piece of advice was for us to call a meeting with the General Manager, Nick Heath. But back to the ranch. The reason we're here today is because City amenity staff members made a recommendation to the Parks and Recreation Committee that the Riding the Mountain project should be approved. With respect to city amenity staff members, they didn't do the job properly, I believe, and therefore the Parks and Recreation Committee didn't have good advice to act on. So that's why Nick is speaking about the Riding the Mountain project being started again from the start, and I also believe that it should be. With respect, city amenity staff members haven't got the expertise to do gold standard recreation planning required for a reserve that is akin to a national park. I mean, this is a huge responsibility for the council. The council needs to sit down with people like Nick, who is a former park planner and is concerned about the natural values of Kenyani, with other groups that are concerned about the natural values, not just with mountain bikers. The council needs to sit down with a spirit of goodwill with all users and with the appropriate experts. City amenity staff members didn't do the public consultation properly. The evidence is there in my representation, and they admit themselves that they consulted mountain bikers. So it's a mountain biking plan for mountain bikers. Therefore, I don't believe that I should be discussing the 3 specific tracks tonight. One of the main points I made in my representation was that related to the habitat fragmentation, and that is, if the council builds too many tracks in Kenyani's eastern face, foothills, whether for bike riders or anyone else, then potentially too many park values will be lost. The foothills area could be so bisected by tracks that its integrity as a wild place would be lost. It wouldn't be much good for the wildlife, etc., and the trees either. And note that Kenyani, the foothills part of Kenyani is wild, it's not wilderness, but it is wild, and people can experience wild nature there. So the planner who assessed the 3 tracks recognised that the planning scheme doesn't deal well with cumulative impacts. So there's plenty of justification for sending this project back to the drawing board. One of the terms of reference of this committee is community consultation, to look into community consultation when it's not acting as a planning authority, and it also can look at environmental planning in general. So that's what I hope to see.
All right. Do you want to? Is there anything much more you want to add?
I'll just add that I'm surprised that the council can retain its membership of the International Association of Public Participation Australasia, given the totally inadequate public consultation that was done around this report. Secondly, I'd like to say that if I can find it. I can't find it, but the claim is that the names of the tracks, the claim in Riding the Mountain on page 22 claims that the track names are chosen with respect to natural and historical values of the mountain. Well, those names are Freewheeling, Rocky Wheeling, Boulder Dash, Heart Attack, Skid Road, lots of names like that. They are sporting names and they're not respectful. So that's my last point.
All right, thank you. Now I'll open it up for questions. Any particular questions? Yep. Councillor Coates.
Look, this question doesn't actually necessarily directly relate to your representation, but I just want to say, I noted in your representation you requested for your email address and postal address not to be published.
Yep.
Unfortunately, your postal address has been.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
But I was
That's
going to say,
all right.
I'll raise that Finance Governance Committee.
That's all right, thanks. Yep.
Alderman Briscoe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your representation and your detailed paper, which I just scanned over. I'll read in full later. I suppose the point I made and Councillor Harvey made is that we're not here considering the overall bike network, but do you think the assessment of each of these tracks has been done well? Because I can see it's pretty comprehensive assessment.
Excuse me, Jeff. I'm saying we shouldn't be here considering these 3 tracks because the Parks and Recreation Committee making the decision to approve it, send it to the council, is the reason why we're here. It shouldn't have been approved because the Parks and Recs Committee wasn't given the information.
This is not the Parks Committee, and as you know, I chair it, so all I can say is that we're here as a planning authority considering an application. We can't go back on policy that's already been decided by council at this particular meeting, but we'll hear from the director, from the manager in a moment.
If it hasn't been done properly, Jeff.
Well, we might have a dispute about that because I do believe it has been done properly. What I do need is that the specifics of these tracks, do you think the assessment of the specifics has been done well.
No, I'm in favour of the Upper Luge being formalised and going ahead, but the other new tracks should be put back to the drawing board, particularly the freewheeling and the rocky wheeling, for the reason Nick has stated, user conflict on Bracken Lane. It's a flashpoint. I was also present on the site visit, and it's just not working. Mountain bikers come rushing down. There's going to be incidents, and needs to go back to the drawing board.
Thank you.
Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, just touching off what Alderman Briscoe's questions, noting that you've got concerns or disagreements with the process that occurred at the Parks Committee level. We're now at a planning committee when we are operating, as Alderman Briscoe said, as a planning authority. With that in mind, is there any, are there any factors relevant to planning and the planning scheme that you have concern with this application, or is it all related to the previous consultation and stuff that happened at the Parks Committee? Because they're just noting they're two separate things.
You probably did answer that already, didn't you? I think that was already asked.
I think I'll just refer to Nick, what Nick said for that one. Thanks.
Any further questions? So just in relation to, again, the area that we did walk yesterday was along O'Grady's Falls fire trail, as well as down Bracken Lane fire trail, and that little fire trail that links both. And then we came to that point where the trails, the Rocky Wheeling and the Freewheeling trail comes off. Could you just describe what concerns you might have for that point?
Okay, the concerns are that creates a loop for mountain bikers to go up and then come downhill, and there's going to be a lot of people doing that. It's going to be highly used, and they'll be coming out into Bracken Lane when they come down. It'll be very popular, I would imagine, and coming into conflict with walkers.
So it's the volume of people. Is parking a concern as well?
No, parking's not a concern. I think that the Hall Saddle proposal will be revitalised and we'll fix that eventually, hopefully. Damon Thomas, I think, moved to put it on ice because of COVID, but I mean, visitors, more and more locals are starting to visit, so there's a real need to bring that forward as a priority.
And in relation to part of this, the loop that you describe, there's a section which looks on this plan to be about 50 metres long, which looks like it's shared. So there would be mountain bikes coming both up and down, with walkers coming up and down, unless I have that completely wrong.
Which one is that?
It's just as you know, that section going off O'Grady's fire trail. And I'll check with Mr Fisher in a moment, but would you have concerns?
Excuse me, are you talking about rocky wheeling and freewheeling?
Yes.
One of them goes up and one of them comes down.
Well, on this plan, and I could be wrong, but on this plan it looks like it starts off together as part of that. But I'll clarify that, but you would have a problem, I presume.
I'm not sure about that.
All right, if you'd like to take your seat, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we have quite a number of concerns raised by the people providing deputations, and we have Mr Fisher here, and I'd like to give you another right of reply, because there's been some quite significant criticism, Mr Fisher, which and obviously we're talking about planning matters, but we'll need to flesh out those things. So do you want to do that as part of questions from the committee, or would you like to just state your point now?
I'm in your hands, Chair, whatever you feel is necessary.
Well, firstly, what I might do is get you again to describe what we're looking at, because it has been quite confusing, and the broadness of the deputations have probably not helped with that. But so could you just present those four areas that we're looking at?
Okay, through you, Chair. Look, this is an application for development of 4 trails identified in the original Riding the Mountain plan, which was approved by Council back on the 20th of November. in November 2020. And the reason for these development applications coming forward is that we agreed in the process of developing the One Mountain plan that the specific details for each of the tracks would be addressed specifically in the planning process, and the environmental assessment particularly would be considered and presented to Council Planning Committee for approval. These 4 tracks, as we've said, one is an upgrade or formalisation of the Upper Luge, which was at the specific request of the Wellington Park Trust to regularise an illegal activity that was there at the moment. The other 3 tracks really reflect the comments or the feedback we had from a variety of groups, including the Tasmania National Parks Association, to separate riders from walkers in narrow tracks, the 1.5 metre tracks that we have as walking tracks or mountain bike tracks, so that in any tracks, ascending tracks are shared use. Both walkers and mountain bike riders can use them if they're ascending, and the other tracks are specifically only for mountain bike users to utilise when they're going downhill. So we've removed the conflict there in these new tracks to meet, I suppose, an expectation that a fast-moving mountain bike approaching from behind can be problematic, can be challenging, can be scary to people. So we've deliberately taken on that suggestion or that recommendation from a variety of user groups, including mountain bike riders, obviously the TNPA, walkers and hiking clubs as well. I won't revisit the decision of Council on the 20th of in November last year, because at length explained to Council the extensive consultation that was undertaken in the development of the mountain plan, both in 2 stages, and I reject the idea that it was only consulting with mountain bike riders. The report on that is available on Council minutes, and it's clear that the consultation was quite widespread, and a majority of comments on those from all user groups were supportive of the plan. These 4 tracks represent specifically implementation of that strategy, and as I said, have adapted and adopted comments to improve their suitability and their usability to all users on the mountain.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with you, Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with you, Mr. Fisher. I do remember that the discussion we had about consultation, and it appears that walkers did have a good say, but not saying that they shouldn't continue having a good say. Because I'm the one, I walk on the mountain as well. I don't use the mountain bike. The representative or deputation we had tonight, the first one from David, regarding parking on Curtis Avenue, can you see in the future or even in the present ways we could manage the traffic there associated with mountain bike riding?
Through you, Chair, I think that's been an ongoing issue of concern for us in developing the mountain, but even just in the amount of use that the mountain gets now. Not all walkers walk from their home to access the eastern face of Mount Wellington. The issues, particularly for Curtis Avenue, I agree, have been exacerbated by the development of extremely popular track there. And I think we all agree that the development of a specific and significant parking opportunity at Hall Saddle will address a majority of those issues. But having said that, there are things that we're currently dealing with at the moment. The upgrade of S56, which would allow people to a green standard, which will allow mountain bikers to park at the junction of Huon Road and Chimney Pot Hill Road below the proposed Hall Saddle project, will allow us, in formalising the parking there, will provide another easy access point outside Bracken Lane, which will allow people to park their car and load their bikes and ride up in a green fashion to get onto those tracks. We're also looking at part of the roundabout proposal at Bracken Lane to look at a parking option below the Gate 1, the entrance to Wellington Park, to provide more structured and hopefully improved parking for people who access the mountain down Bracken Lane from Pillinger Drive. And I think there is also options, we're talking with Cascade about getting opportunities for improved parking for mountain bike riders to come up the Cascade track or through Old Farm Road as well. Multiple accesses to the face of the mountain is a much better strategy for us, and a number of those things are being considered and proposed as we speak.
Just as a supplementary question, Chair, there has been some comments about non-compliance of the if these two tracks are made. Can you just tell the committee or tell me who does the compliance?
Your Chair, the compliance for the Wellington Park area is undertaken by the Wellington Park Ranger. The City of Hobart provides funding for that position. The current compliance strategy for the Wellington Park Ranger clearly identifies the access of mountain bikes and other illegal uses on there. That's a change to the way we've done it in the past. We're being more specific about directing the funding we have for that position to specifically identify and address these non-compliance issues for mountain bikers, motorbikes, etc., etc. And I think that will become, and has become, quite significant. And last year I think we issued a number of PIN notices to people under the Wellington Park Act. The other issue of non-compliance is obviously parking, and I think the point was made by Mr Westmore that people parking across the gate, whether it be at Bracken Lane or whether it be in Curtis Avenue, is something, a compliance issue for our parking staff to go up and deal with. And we regularly on busy days contact our parking compliance officers in the city and ask them to venture to the mountain and educate some people who choose to ignore those no standing signs or no parking signs.
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
No, I think we've covered it, thanks.
Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Just wondering if you could touch a bit on some of the concerns that were raised about the impact on flora and fauna.
Look, and it is, I think, the report, we've undertaken a significant amount of work on the pathway, the broader pathway for these tracks, and the actual location of the tracks is specifically designed to, and as the report says, to not clear any trees, to not disturb or clear any fallen, dead or down timber, to avoid habitat, rocky outcrops, etc., where we might have denning sites or we might have potential habitat for species. I see, and I agree with the planner's report, that there's negligible impact upon existing or potential habitat for species of concern, but also the methods of construction of these tracks will be essentially pulling away the humus layer and the organic soil layer down to a mineral earth layer to a maximum width of 1.5 metres of clearance to allow the track to wind its way through the existing vegetation that's present in these routes. I think all that combined with the work that will be done to stabilise these tracks means that the level of impact of these mountain bike tracks is negligible. The question that comes there though is, I think a lot of the complaints about compliance and impacts, etc., are talking about fire trails. Because fire trails are wide, and it's the same with roads, if you have a wide road, people will drive according to the standard that they think the road can bear. Fire trails bring that same impression that mountain bikers feel that they can travel at a different speed that they might on a narrow 1.5 metre pathway. And I think some of the work we've done in terms of putting chicanes and entry points and exit points there are ways in which we can moderate that speed. But once again, they are fire trails, they're not walking tracks, and they're not mountain bike tracks. So maintenance or management of users, both walkers and mountain bike riders on fire trails, is a different issue than managing them on a mountain bike track.
Any further questions? I've got a number of questions. So, Mr Fisher, you did mention the S56 link that's likely to occur at some, like we're going to consider that at some stage?
Yes, look, we've been in discussions, Chair, through the visitor and rec management strategy with the Wellington Park Trust to look at how we can improve access from multiple points, and S56 is a key connector to that section around Chimney Pot Hill Road, and we're looking to improve that work. It's not a massive amount of work, and we believe we can undertake that as part of our renewal program within the next 12 months.
And when are you coming back to us in relation to Hall Saddle?
Hall Saddle, a proposal for Hall Saddle will be considered at the executive leadership team this week. We've recast that in accordance with the directions from council last year, and we'll be putting that back to council once the LT have considered the proposal.
So, and you see that as probably addressing some of these concerns relating to parking?
I think universally we've had almost a violent agreement that it's a logical place for us to do that work, to gather people in that number of car parks in that location, and its ability to attract people to a central location which won't impact upon other residents. More importantly, provide a bus terminus to allow people to transport to the Springs, and these 4 tracks here can be accessed from the Springs, so that's another place where people can park and ride. But I think the future I see as being with Hall Saddle, activating the opportunity for people to put a bike on a bus and ride to the Springs, etc., and then utilise the existing network of tracks to use them, rather than parking at Bracken Lane or Curtis Avenue is our preferred option.
Thank you. I do have concerns which I've asked the people giving deputations, but just in relation to that linkage with O'Grady's Road or the O'Grady's Fire Trail, but also when it comes up to Shoebridge Bend, there is an area of track or a length of track that is shared by the looks of this. How can we avoid that? Because that's of concern, and that is coming down at quite an angle onto a very slow moving, walkers slowly moving on O'Grady's Falls Fire Trail, because that's obviously an easy contoured link to the falls.
There are 2 aspects to that, Chair. First is the duplication. I think, and we want to minimise the number of tracks we put in close proximity to each other in that area, and duplicating that track to make a walking track and a mountain bike track in that area is problematic because of the slope, etc. I think Mr Sawyer made a good comment there that the entrance onto the O'Grady's Fire Trail could be chicaned in a way that we can slow people down so that they can't just barrel through onto the road. We've done that at a number of locations, on Pinnacle Road, for example, and I think there's some treatment of those sites would allow us to moderate the speed of mountain bikes which are accessing that area. But once again, cognizant of the fact that we are trying to do the best we can for both a balance between conservation outcomes in terms of minimising the disturbance to the mountain, but also to ensure that people have to understand that there will be, and there are currently, shared use tracks on the mountain throughout the city, and an issue of good mountain bike and walker behaviour is an education process that both the City and Wellington Park Trusts are actively involved in.
Okay, I'm just concerned. I'm still concerned about that conflict, because it just seems like you're bringing, and I understand reducing conflict, clearing or whatever, but I'm just concerned about that conflict of, and I'm not sure that chicanes, well, whether that's going to really address it, and whether having those completely separated would be a better.
If I may quote Mr Sawyer, 95% of mountain bike riders are, and Mr Westmore have made the point, 95% of mountain bike riders are respectful and responsible and that sort of thing. I think in terms of to treat mountain bike behaviour in a specific location, I think is counterintuitive. I think we need to develop amongst all users of the mountain that respect for each other. And I think in some cases we can obviously put in a chicane or a structure, but at the end of the day, as mountain bike use becomes more and more common and more sort of utilised by locals, the growth of mountain bike riding in in Australia, of course, and universally, is massive. So I think in some cases we need to be more aware of the opportunity to educate people and make sure that that sort of behaviour is either peer group pressure removes that as the way it's done, and I think that's becoming much more prevalent on the mountain, where people are being probably more mountain bike riders particularly are demonstrating their need for all members of the community to act responsibly.
So there is opportunity for that sort of education and respectful use of the mountain, yep, which is obviously not a planning issue. Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is not a planning issue, but I'm just wanting to bring this point back. A suggestion was made that we put on hold. Now, can you explain the difficulty of doing that, either to the director or?
Putting this on hold.
Yeah.
Yes. If
There
there was
a statement made with regards to that.
Yeah, Mr. Fisher.
Through you, Chair. I think the suggestion was putting on hold the whole of the mountain bike network strategy, rather than the individual things. These 4 tracks are funded by 2 state government grants. The first 2 tracks will be Rocky Wheeling and Free Wheeling will be required to be, that grant fund will need to be acquitted by the 30th of June 2022. We have delayed these submissions to Council for because it's 100 Pinnacle Road. It has been in abeyance for some time because of another development application which may have been confused by that address. We are very, very close to the edge of being able to deliver the cycleway grant from the state government, and the second set of tracks is subject of a second grant from the federal government as well. Our ability to delay these is non-existent, to be honest. Yeah.
Spoken like a true developer, Mr.
Pardon?
Fisher. Spoken like a true developer.
Well, yeah. Well,
anyway.
Like I'm here. As you say, we've the documentation, the assessment we've done on these, I think is, and the planner's report is very clear about that, is extensive and I think very solid. And the conditions proposed in the planner's report further enforce the environmental values and the protection of the environmental values of Wellington Park. So I'm comfortable that we can implement this with and meet the statements we've made about the value of these tracks and their ongoing maintenance.
Thank you. Any further questions of Mr. Fisher? No? Okay, so I'll open the item for discussion. Alderman Barakis.
Chair, look, I'm happy to move that. I think whilst many of the concerns raised, I think we're informative. I think it's not to cast any aspersions on this particular issue, because I wasn't a member of that committee and wasn't huge. I think not a member of the Parks Committee, and so I can't speak in detail to the consultation process, but it is something that I've heard before on other issues. But as informative as it might be, and it might be something that we might want to look into in the future. It's, as Councillor Harvey said, and he's completely correct, I don't think it's a planning issue. And from a planning perspective, I think the issue is pretty cut and dry. I think it is. The relevant considerations, I think it is interesting and potentially even ironic that some of the concerns raised seem to parallel or share some of the concerns of another recent development on Mount Wellington, but I won't reflect too much on that, other than to say, look, perhaps we'll see how we go with this, but I'm happy to move this one.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yes, Chair. I heard from the deputations that the Upper Luge is supported, that that's a good idea to formalise that track, and that the other Rocky Wheeling, the new track, uphill bike tracks are supported as well. That the issues are on the fire trails, so they're not issues dealing specifically with these new and formalising of these 4 tracks. So other issues have been identified that I'm sure will be dealt with by officers over time, during construction, and also management of the mountain via the Wellington Park Trust and by City of Hobart to alleviate some of these problems, like the conflict points. They need to be looked at regularly to see how they're travelling. The car parking issues, which we've heard will be resolved when and if we get the Hall Saddle project up and going. Some of the other things, the spreading of weeds and diseases, I do have concerns about throughout the park. I'd hate to think, you know, phytophthorus is spread via bike, so I would like to think there's protocols at some point. And I don't know, and I'll direct this to Mr. Fisher. Are there already protocols for people washing their bikes before they turn up at Mount Wellington? Are people encouraged to wash their bikes?
Through you, Chair, they're certainly encouraged. The question is whether they do or not is probably a matter of how new the bike is, I think, and how clean they want to keep it. I think the issue for that has been, in my experience at least, is to provide a facility as close to the entrance that you could, and our intention was always to have that at the Hall Saddle, that actually have a washdown facility for people before they took their bike on the mountain and as they came off, because if you do it at that time, people are more likely to utilise the facility when it's there and it's easy to use, rather than asking them to take it home or that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I agree with that. Yep. And another issue raised, which is not about this planning scheme necessarily, but it was covered in the environmental component of this, was impact on habitat fragmentation, and that was spoken about in the report, to talk about looking after dens, not removing trees, limiting impact as much as possible. So I think we've got that covered, and I'm confident, and I hope I'm right, that the people who build these tracks, and we've had accolades for some of the other tracks that have been built on the mountain about how they've used the natural elements available, the stone and the stonework and the skill of the people constructing those tracks. So I've been impressed with track building on the mountain over time, and I've met a lot of the track builders over time, and they love their jobs, and they do they make a big effort to make sure that these tracks are as good as possible, and I think that's needs to be acknowledged. So I'll be supporting this tonight because I think the community understand what these tracks are going to be. They've got other issues with mountain bikes on the mountain that I think can be addressed through the Wellington Park Trust, through the council, as we go forward with what happens with mountain bikes on the mountain. And it is a huge and growing industry, I guess you want to call it, or sector. But being able to put the right regulation on it, or the right conditions, or the right code of practice that mountain bikers adhere to, I think is important going forward. And I would like to think the council is proactive with that, and the code of practice might be the thing to work with the mountain bike community to make sure that they do show all that respect. But tonight, for these particular tracks, I think they've passed the planning scheme, and I'll be supporting them tonight.
Thank you. Alderman Briscoe?
Yeah, just a few comments. So look, I thank the deputations tonight who alerted us, reminded us of some issues. Mr Westmore reminded us of the effect on some residents in Curtis Avenue and surrounding streets. I think we'll all be keeping an eye on parking in those areas, and if the officers come to us with any immediate traffic solutions there, I'm sure we'll be we'll look into that. Mr Sawyer and Ms Wilson brought up bigger issues, and I think probably the reason why the council got into formalising these tracks is to keep, I think the history of mountain biking on a mountain was unregulated. By having the mountain bikers on site, they do essentially stick to trails these days, and a different profile. There are middle-aged men and women who we've heard from in our consultation on the greater plan use mountain bike trails on the mountain. So I think it's staggered. We're not considering all the new proposed trails. We're considering 3 or 4 tonight. It's gone through a process here in council. It's gone through an extensive planning application. It's gone through the Wellington Park Trust, which have also an interest in this area. So I must, whilst some of the representatives, deputation want us to stop the process, I think the process is a good process. And I would say compliance issues are going to be handled professionally, and if more resources have to go into that as the mountain bike community grows, I think we would look at that. I don't believe we should stop the process. I think this has been done staggered, as I said earlier, it's been staggered, and I will be supporting the motion which was moved by Alderman Farkas.
Thank you. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank the deputation and for the points that they made. I was really concerned and wanted both sides of the arguments or presentation with regard to the processes and especially consultation. And I think the responses made by the officer has satisfied me. And the evidence that is already there for us. So with regards to processes and the issue of consultation, which was my concern, has been, for me, has been satisfied. Secondly, a number of issues or problems which were raised again, and I think you have alluded to, and the council has made statements with regards to the options we have, especially with regards to parking. So that satisfies me as well. And thirdly, the third point I want to make is that for me, to make a decision and to support this is based on planning rules. And as I've gone through the various acceptable solution, and I found that the arguments presented quite clearly supports that, and I will have difficulty not to support this particular motion. So I'm quite satisfied with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further points? No? Okay. I'll just, there's a couple of things that I wanted to say. Do we have conditions, Mr. Noy, relating to those conflict points, and how would we, like, does it need to be conditioned as to the potential, like coming off those both those tracks, or where the area is shared? Is that a condition we can add to this?
I think you could include some advice, Chair, to the effect that consideration be given to managing speed of mountain bikers or entering O'Grady's Falls Fire Trail.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. If you're happy to add that.
Chair, look, I'm more than happy to. I thought it's interesting that we're providing advice to ourselves effectively, but I thought
we're advising a development application and approval to ourselves. So of course, like if we can strengthen it, then why wouldn't we?
More than happy to accept.
Thank you. Just in relation to Mr. Fisher, the information, or this might be an advice clause as well, just in relation to that etiquette or bike riders dismount or whatever. What can we do there? Is there information that we can provide to users as part of this application?
Well, again, I mean, you're talking about this whole issue of etiquette and signage and the like. But I mean, I would be guided to a large extent by the extensive experience of the people that are managing this on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, Mr. Fisher.
Through you, Chair. Look, it's a critical issue for us, the City of Hobart as a landowner, but also Wellington Park Trust. I think it's been raised a number of times by the TNPA and other users. I think we're all working towards a better outcome. I think there are 3 levels of intervention we need to improve etiquette on the mountain. That's the signage what we've been putting up over the last 12 months at each of the track heads, and the code of conduct that we've been promoting through Wellington Park Trusts. Secondly, the design of, as you rightly say, in those conflict zones where we might change the form of the track or the surface of the track or some chicanes or whatever it might be, to remove the potential conflict in those particular zones. And thirdly, I think the really good thing that's come out of this through the advisory group, project advisory group, is a very strong connection with the mountain bike rider groups on the mountain, and emphasising importantly that they have a key role in changing mountain bike rider behaviour, and right from the shredding Betties right through to the long-standing mountain bike groups, they are enforcing a code of conduct separate to the city or to the trust. And I think supporting, engaging and maintaining that communication with them is the way forward. It's a little bit like, there are certain rules when you ride it, if you're a surfer at all, a community has a particular way in which rules sets that are set by a local community. It's just as important for the community to enforce those standards as it is for myself or a regulator or the trust.
Thank you. All right. Yes, I think obviously there are some concerns by those people who use the mountain for slightly different reasons than mountain bike riders, and these paths are going to encourage. Having said that, what they do is formalise some of the informal paths, and perhaps, I don't know if it's going to be 100% accurate, but perhaps that will keep mountain bike riders to those main trails that are formed. We are only considering four tracks tonight. It's not the whole plan, and obviously this will go. This decision tonight will go through to council for this is a recommendation tonight. I think the conversation around Hall Saddle is imperative to really consider how this becomes not more of a problem for the intensification, if you like, that is provided with mountain bike riders and building more tracks, and very good tracks. I mean, we saw the drop track the other day, or whatever it's called, I can't remember. But obviously that was being utilised, that we saw, and it's obviously a much loved part of the mountain bike tracks that are there. So it doesn't satisfy all of my concerns, but I think with that further advice and heeding the tenor of this discussion tonight, Mr. Fisher, I don't think that I can not support the application as it is. So if there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion as slightly amended.
Could I just hear that amendment again, please?
Have you got that, Dave?
First one was in relation to managing the speed, entering around the O'Grady's track.
Thank you.
And the second piece of advice in regards to Mr. Fisher was talking about efficiency of signage at trackheads, design within conflict zones, and connections between the mountain bike groups.
What's that mean? Connections between the mountain bike groups?
Well, strong connection within the mountain bike groups, so I guess is that a consultation with?
Ongoing consultation, but that's not really I don't think that was, it was really the first one that was the...
Signage at trackheads.
Yeah.
I've got the word consideration be given to ways of managing the speed of mountain bikers entering O'Grady's Fall Fire Trail from the new bike trails.
That's advice, not a condition.
That's advice. Yep.
It's not a condition.
Yeah, that was the only one.
All right. We all clear on that one? Okay, I'll put that. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Items carried. And it will go to full council on Monday. Thank you. Now, committee, are you keen to keep cracking on?
Yep.
Okay, all right. We go now to 7.1.3, which is 7 Hadley Court, Lena Valley. It's for two dwellings, I suppose. Alderman Barakis, you happy to move that?
Yep.
Discussion? No discussion. I think there was only one representation, and they were concerned about the stormwater, and I think that was addressed in the conditions. I'll put that. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Items carried, and that's now an approval. Doesn't go to council. 7.1.4 is 34 Wellesley Street, South Hobart, partial demolition and ancillary dwelling. This is our first consideration of ancillary dwelling, so the pressure's on. So, Councillor Harvey, you've moved that. Thank you. Discussion?
Chair, you talk about pressures on. You're referring to that to access the grant, one needs to have a planning approval in place.
Was that the letter that we got?
Yeah,
from,
I saw a letter from
yes.
the state government saying that they're in line to get a grant.
Sonoy?
Look, I'm not sure of the specific requirements. Obviously, not a planning consideration.
I was just referring, just trying to elaborate, trying to work out why the pressure's on.
Oh, sorry, you're asking me. Okay, no, I'm just saying that we talked about ancillary dwellings and supporting them.
Yes.
Yep,
oh yes,
yep.
So from that point of view.
Yes. Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Harvey's already moved it. Councillor Dutta, you've?
Yeah, and there were
Councillor Dutta?
there are a number of issues in there, and I went and visited the property today, and I'm quite satisfied, with the concerns that was raised, and I think the report has met those arguments quite well. So I'm satisfied with that. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there is no further discussion, I'll put the motion and note that Alderman Briscoe's not in the room. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. That's a decision. Item 8 is reports. 8.1 is delegated decision report. Alderman Baracus, thank you. To be received and noted. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Alderman Briscoe's back in the room. 8.2 is city planning advertising report. And you'll notice here that 66 Burnett Street has an additional 8 dwellings, I think. Perhaps, Ms Abbey, can you just confirm? What did you want to?
I know, yeah.
66 Burnett Street?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there is already an approval for a substantial development on that site. There has been an application to increase the development by 1 floor and 8 dwellings. That has raised some parking concerns. Those issues are being considered, as I understand it, by our development engineers and the applicant.
And it's still open for advertising at the moment?
Yes, that's correct. We'll close tomorrow.
Right, okay. Can I have somebody receive and note those? Or
Yes.
Councillor Dutta, thanks. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Item 9 is committee action status report. Have somebody move that, please? Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Item 10, questions without notice. Alderman Baracus.
I have a question through you to the Director. I've got 2 questions actually. Can the Director please provide some advice as to the number of new short stay permits issued by the Council in the last 12 months and the number of dwellings rejected by Council, the number of residential dwellings rejected by Council in the last 12 months?
Did you get that?
Yes, I did, and in fact I've got those numbers.
You've got those numbers, all right?
Yes. 39 short stay visitor accommodations approved in the last 12 months, and dwellings refused. There were 4 applications in total and in number, with the number of dwellings within those 4 proposals amounting to 92 dwellings.
Do you have another question?
I did not, Chair, thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Harvey.
My question is, how many ancillary dwellings have been approved in Hobart? Pick a period.
Frame?
Today, one, yeah.
For an adventure.
45? Yeah. When did this come in? When did we get that in the planning scheme, the ancillary dwellings?
The ancillary dwellings have been in the planning scheme since the beginning of time.
Okay, all right. Well, let's go back to when the Romans, last 12 months.
Well, I'll clearly...
You'll take that one on notice?
And I guess the point of this, and the...
Is this a question?
Yeah, this is a question. I'm going to put a question mark on the end of it. Most of them haven't come to council, yes or no?
That would be my assumption.
And are they included in the statistics for increasing the number of dwellings in Hobart? Because they don't require the standard planning approval, so therefore have they been adding to the housing stock in Hobart without us knowing?
No, they are included in
As part of the dwellings.
statistics in terms of...
Okay, all right.
So,
Yep.
Any other questions for that notice? Councillor Coates?
Look, this is just a well, no, it is a question. It's coming up today because I noticed in one of the deputations they requested not to have their postal address published, and unfortunately it was published. But my question is, before stuff gets published online, is it proofread? And I assume in this instance it was just missed.
What was the question?
Is before something gets published, so for example deputations that have been received, are they proofread by more than one person?
Well, the representations are what have been submitted, and they're only included on the hub for elected members. Information are not publicly released.
Yeah, okay. Yep. Thanks.
Any other questions for that notice? Okay, I've got one that I'm asking on behalf of the Lord Mayor. Can the Director advise what Council can expect from building surveyors under the newly approved Professional Standards Scheme for Building Surveyors, which commenced on the 1st of July 2021? I understand this scheme will operate across all states and territories. It would be beneficial to understand how, can you explain how local government will be affected and how best we can support the changes?
I'll take that one on notice, Chair.
Dave, I've got that here for you. All right, item 11 is closed portion of the meeting. Thank you, Alderman Baracus. Those in favour? Those against?